Hello, I'm Mark Ellen. Thanks for clicking this word in your ear, the latest of hundreds of conversations David Hepworth and I have had on this podcast we started 17 years ago. Some with ourselves, others with musicians, authors, comedians, and other people we like. If you enjoy them and want to support us and keep it all coming and get extra entertainment, including the weekly quiz and a special event on your birthday, visit patreon.com/wordinyour-ear or just like or subscribe in whatever way you prefer.
You're listening to a podcast from The Word.
Well, that was sad news this week about Marianne Faithfull. And what an extraordinary life, just reading about it. And an extraordinary time. That was that kind of intersection between fast-rising, working-class, lower-middle-class pop stars and party-loving posh girls. People like her, people like Anita Pallenberg. And there they were in the middle of it, a very 60s thing.
Extraordinary. I interviewed her in 1979 at the time of the Ballad of Lucy Jordan, and which you may remember that Shel Silverstein.
Yeah, I do.
Song, which was all about a kind of woman on the verge of middle age, regretfully looking back. You know, at the age of 37, she realised she'd never ride through Paris in a sports car with a warm wind in her hair and all that kind of thing. And it's extraordinary to think, she was probably, when I interviewed her, I don't know, about 34 or something like that.
Yeah.
And if you told, I think, either of us that, there'd be another kind of 40-some years of kind of is the icon still associated with the 60s, I think both of us would have been amazed. It's one of those extraordinary things that post sort of 1968, I suppose the words Marianne Faithfull just had a kind of resonance, didn't they? You know what I mean? Of kind
incredible
of glamour and tragedy.
She was tragedy. She was so famous. One of the things that struck me, again, a byproduct, I think, of getting older, is just how young she was. She turned 17 in December 63. So in early 64, she met the Stones at a launch party for one of their records, which I can only work out must have been their first album, which would be in April 1964. So she'd only just left being a boarder at a convent school in Reading, had her first hit when she was just 17. She was discovered, wasn't she, by when she met Andrew Oldham at the party. She was there with John Dunbar. And being presented then, still as effectively as kind of as a schoolgirl, there's a very famous series of photographs which Gerard Mankiewicz took, and we had him on the podcast. He talked about them. Where again, she was just 17. Gerard, I think, might have been. I think he was even younger. And they're in a pub in Holborn. Do you remember?
No, not Holborn. I'll tell you where this pub is. It's called the Salisbury. It's on St Martin's Lane, and it's one of the few pubs that's resisted the march of time. It's a kind of Edwardian gin palace, with fabulous architecture, which is why Gerard took her in there to have the pictures taken. And you can still go in it today. And there she is, kind of lounging against the sort of banquette, I suppose, wearing a kind of flowery frock, isn't she?
She's wearing knee-length white socks that come to accentuate. It's that kind of almost a schoolgirl thing.
In a pub.
She was very much presented in Alice bands, wasn't she? And in a pub that she wasn't allowed to be in the first place.
I spoke to Gerard about this, and we worked out that neither of them were old enough to be in the pub. He taking the picture and she posing for the picture, but it's a reminder of that kind of those girls who drifted into the 60s on the arms of kind of rock stars, because that's the way it worked. Well, it's like Pattie Boyd. Pattie Boyd was incredibly young, wasn't she? You know?
Yeah.
They had to go first date with George Harrison. They had to be kind of chaperoned by Brian Epstein.
By Brian Epstein, that's right.
You know, it was a kind of a social setup people would find very hard to recognise nowadays. But it was a kind of hangover of the 50s, wasn't it? And
but also Andrew, with her parents, you kind of think, well, I now look at things from the point of view of parents sometimes.
Oh,
think,
absolutely.
How would I have felt?
What were they thinking?
If my 16, 17-year-old girl just left convent school, was hanging around with the Rolling Stones and making a record and going into show business. But if you look at her family, I mean, the parents are split up, so her father wasn't around, which is an interesting thing. I mean, that's such a big part of so many people, you know, John Lennon being a really good example. People without fathers acted in rebellious ways that often people wouldn't have done if they had a father around or a mother. But also, you know, she had a mother who was she was a ballerina, wasn't she? Her mum, Eva, I think, was a ballerina in Germany and was related to the kind of Hungarian aristocratic family. And therefore, her mum would have encouraged her to get into show business, wouldn't she? She would have been really pushing for it.
Yeah. And because the strange thing is that, well, you sent me that piece from I think the Observer from early 2000s.
Lynn Barber's piece, yeah.
Lynn Barber's extraordinary profile when Marianne Faithfull was promoting some movie. And one of the questions I think Lynn Barber asks is, how do you live? How do you get by?
Yeah.
And there's no kind of obvious answer to that, really. You know what I mean? Because she lived for all that time on the basis of being Marianne Faithfull. You know what I mean? It was a kind of calling card, wasn't it?
Yeah.
In all kinds of ways, you know. And it was, you couldn't listen to her records without knowing, well, this is Marianne Faithfull singing this song. You know, it was kind of like being Marlene Dietrich or something.
It really was. Really had her stamp on it, didn't it?
But it was associated with a kind of bygone era, you know. And so it was a question of casting her as doing these kind of right kind of songs, which always had to be kind of tragic, because it was understood that the life was more sad than anything, you know. And I suppose it was just extraordinary that when you consider the kind of hazardous nature of the life she lived in the late 60s. And you know, she spent 2 years in the 70s, didn't she? Living on the streets, pretty much.
She did.
You know, heroin.
And the people who kind of gravitated towards her and collaborated with her were people who all had a similar kind of sensibility and you know, I admired the idea of the kind of bruised, courageous survivor. Yeah. Like Steve Earle, Mark Lanigan, Nick Cave, Lou Reed, Wayne Kramer, Beck, PJ Harvey, Damon Albarn. There's a certain kind of person who really supported her. As you say, her identity was incredibly strong as representing just the life she lived.
Goes back to this point that fame acquired in the 60s is kind of like no other form of fame. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's as if it's made of a more valuable coin than fame achieved in the 70s, 80s, 90s or whatever. You know what I mean? It's sort of, you know, as if it relates to some age that people just can't imagine, but nevertheless revere. It's extraordinary. And, you know, that she was already kind of, that was happening when I interviewed her in 1979. When you consider that is what we're talking about, 46 years ago, you know what I mean? It was already looking back 46 years ago.
Well, that's another thing, isn't it? That you would just never imagine that, you know, that she'd be even more famous now, effectively, than she was in the 1960s, which is extraordinary. And that record, Broken English, when that came out in 1979, that really, really saved her life. That was a huge, it wasn't a big chart success, but it sold all over the world very solidly, didn't it? Was it 1.5 million copies?
I don't know. I mean, people certainly remember it, you know. Although it's really interesting when you look back over, you know, people's lives. And one of the things that happens in the music business particularly is people have a habit of completely forgetting things that flopped. And therefore, they're no longer part of the story. So a few years before Broken English, she made a country album for the kind of Irish market. You know?
Yeah, she did.
Well, nobody's talking about that anymore, no. You know. They just remember the things that kind of chime with the popular image of her. But, you know, it's an extraordinary story. It's extraordinary to read that Lynn Barber thing, which, as I say, what was it, year 2000? And it was a reminder of all kinds of things. On a personal note, it reminded me of how much I miss the great set piece magazine profile behind the scenes story of the photo session and the flapping PR and all the hoopla that used to surround stars at encounters with the print media. You know, they were such an important part of our lives, weren't they?
That piece was fantastic. We should it's still online. And if you just, I think Lynn Barber, Marianne Faithfull, Observer or whatever. I can't remember the headline, something like "I'm not everybody's cup of tea" or something. It was in 2001. And the basic thing was that Lynn Barber goes along, and you and I have been through this a million times. But goes along to meet her, and she's at the photo shoot with David Bailey, and the photo shoot, it's meant to start. I can't remember at 1:00 or something. They ring her up, and she's only just got out of bed. So when she turns up 3 or 4 hours later, we've all been through this, you know, they then take endless pictures that are clearly, in Lynn Barber's view, unsuitable for the observer. They're far too, she's wearing kind of corsets and things like that, you know, stuff that just isn't going to work. And eventually Lynn Barber gets up and makes a speech and she says, "Can I just stop proceedings for a moment? There will be no use for these photographs unless there's an interview. Yeah. And unless we have that interview, you know, this whole thing is pointless. So let's do the interview now." And she does the interview. And the big problem is that Marianne Faithfull has brought with her a man called, is he called Francois? I think so. Who is her manager and also turns out to be someone with whom she's having some kind of relationship. And they've obviously rather fallen out at this point. And throughout the entire thing, she's just refusing to talk about something. She's there to promote a film. And when Lynn Barber, obviously journalistically, that's the deal. You've got to ask a few questions about the past to give a bit of context to be able to sell whatever the person's trying to sell. But Marianne Faithfull will not play ball, will she? She will not talk about anything at all. And it ends up in a massive Barney, what I think used to be called a hatchet job. Although actually this isn't really a hatchet job. A hatchet job is where you arrive intending to bury somebody. But no, she arrives thinking, great, Marianne Faithfull, this is going to be exciting. And they're just disappointed by how unbelievably abrasive and rude she is. But I do miss those kind of encounters.
It is amazing to reflect on the fact that, and it used to happen so often.
Yeah.
That if a star, and they don't have to be, you know, they don't have to be kind of Whitney Houston. They don't have to be an enormous, you know, Michael Jackson or whatever. They just have to have an extraordinary opinion of themselves, which is kind of half the battle of being a star, is you have to have that elevated opinion of yourself. And if you are set up for a day's press and you lie in bed for 3 hours in the morning rather than getting up and starting, the rest of the day is going to be a catastrophe, isn't it?
Because
you're going to have a whole load of people
down like a load of dominoes.
Like a load of dominoes. You can pretty much guarantee that's like taking the pin out of the grenade and rolling it under the door. I mean, it's just, you know, it's crazy. But, you know, as a reader, you can't help settling down going, "Ooh, this is going to go wrong. Whoopee!" Rub your hands together.
But actually, also, you know, the PRs would have complained because the PRs would have got it in the neck. But as regards the star, that kind of press was really good press, I think.
Yeah,
I think it was very good. I mean, I look back at Brian Ferry being a really good example of someone who got incredibly bad press, particularly in the music press, particularly from the NME. And ultimately that did him a lot of good because it gave him a profile. It gave the band publicity. It got them noticed. It got them talked about. It made them an issue. Phil Collins is someone else who got unbelievably bad press, and it worked eventually in that if you get very bad press, it will inevitably turn the other way around. You know, there's a time when you couldn't say anything nice about Phil Collins. Now you can't say anything horrible about him. He's an absolutely incredibly highly regarded, isn't he? drummer, musician, person. The only person I can remember getting bad press that I think genuinely did him harm was Sting, who gave an interview in, I think, about 1989 or whatever, I think it was Q Magazine, actually, Adrian Devoy, when he talked about tantric sex. You remember that? And that, I think that just struck a bad note. Never talk about your sex life. There's not a single person on God's earth who kind of wishes their sex life was probably more extravagant than it was or whatever. And that just came across as smug, didn't it? The idea that Sting had enough time in his life to have tantric sex. I could spend 6 hours this afternoon when you're probably working. I could probably be doing something else, And that really never, people were looking for an excuse to dislike him, I think, because they thought he was smug. And this became the excuse. And I think that still lingers on. There's still an element with Sting of, oh, God, tantric sex, no thanks.
Yeah, you can always snigger behind his back, can't you? You kind of know that. Yeah. But the thing about Marianne Faithfull, it struck me reading the stuff this week, is that, you kind of end up as a kind of sacred figure or a kind of outrageous diva. There's kind of nothing in between, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And you kind of think the truth with anybody's life is very much in between, But if you project yourself in that way, that's how people will remember you, And so that's the case. As you say, all these years later, when she died, more famous than ever.
The Word Podcast, prime cuts of popular culture served fresh each week.
So we had one of our events the other day, David Bowie in London and Hollywood. And sadly, technical gremlins meant that we can't bring you the normal recording as we would normally do these things. But we can give you a bit of a sense of what we talked about, because one of our guests, and we're very interested to meet him, was John Mendelssohn, who I remember from my youth as a Rolling Stone reader, was Rolling Stone's kind of star journalist in the very early 70s. And he was the person, he's written this book called Peculiar to Mr. Bowie, which is about his time with David Bowie when David Bowie visited the United States for the first time in January, February 1971. And so he was the person who was asked by Rolling Stone he was based in Los Angeles at the time, and he also had a group called Christopher Milk. And he was asked by Rolling Stone to fly to San Francisco and meet this kind of unknown British eccentric folkie called David Bowie.
All he thought about him was that he had an interesting perm and bad teeth. But he didn't really know much about his records, did he?
Didn't know much about him at all. And of course, it's a reminder that a lot of people didn't know much about David Bowie in 1971. In Britain, he'd had a hit with Space Oddity, but then nothing afterwards. There's no reason to believe he was ever going to follow it up. But Mendelssohn beats him in San Francisco, where he got off the plane from Texas. And, of course, the Bowie he meets is the one with the kind of Veronica Lake hair, straggly hairdo. And he's got, in his bag, he's got 2 male gowns, hasn't he? Which is
man dresses made by Mr. Fish.
Made by Mr.
And when he
Fish.
puts them on, and he then does a photo session with him, doesn't he? At a Holiday Inn, I think. And he described himself as being quite flustered by the sight of David Bowie wearing these dresses. He said he kind of looked a little bit like Lauren Bacall. He was suddenly found himself rather attracted to him and a bit destabilized.
It's very strange because these photographs are in this book, and so John Mendelssohn took them. And so they're not, and this is not disrespectful at all, they're kind of snaps, aren't they, really?
Yeah,
they're not highly styled. And normally when a highly styled photographer does something, they go along with the illusion that the subject seeks to project. Whereas John Mendelssohn's pictures are just, here's a picture of David Bowie in a frock, standing outside the Holiday Inn.
The bare brick wall of a Holiday Inn. That's right.
with a kind of lady's bag over his shoulder,
Yeah.
And so he just spends time with him. He takes him to radio interviews and so forth, where the DJ doesn't know what to make of him at all. And he accompanies him, flies down to Los Angeles with him and spends time with him in Hollywood. And he's there when David Bowie, for some reason, is invited to perform at a kind of hipster party in the Hollywood Hills.
You're not even sure he's invited to perform. He's just invited, isn't he? But he decides that on a waterbed, he's going to sit there cross-legged with his guitar and play some of his songs. And no one's ever heard of him. No one's heard of the song.
He plays Jacques Brel songs.
Jacques Brel songs, that's right.
We've all seen these pictures before. And, where he kind of looks fabulous, and there are fabulous-looking people in the background, and you can see the waterbed and so forth. We've all seen these pictures, but I've never heard a proper account of what actually happened until John Mendelssohn told us about it. He started playing Jacques Brel songs, and he said, Mendelssohn said, I couldn't believe how he couldn't read a room. That this was not going down well at all. You imagine you're sipping drinks at a party on the Hollywood Hills in 1971, and suddenly somebody starts singing In the Port of Amsterdam. Somebody you've never heard of it.
Somebody in a dress.
God's sake, turn it in, would you please, kindly? But no, he kind of keeps going. And, almost kind of emptied the party room, didn't he?
Yeah.
And, he was also with him at a radio interview when
he goes down to San Jose, doesn't he? And he has to DJ. Bowie has to DJ, and he's not quite sure what to play. And John Mendelssohn suggests playing the Stooges. It introduces him, I think, to the Stooges. What an incredibly important thing that was. He'd never heard of them.
You see, that's my whole thing about Bowie's trip to the States. I think it's absolutely fascinating.
Yeah.
He's there for 2 weeks. He goes, and here is the key point, he goes on his own. He doesn't go with the manager. He doesn't go with Mick Ronson. He doesn't go with his wife, who's just about to have a baby at home. He goes on his own, and he flies to Washington. He's met by, what was he called, Ron Oberman, the guy who's the head of press at his record company Mercury at the time. Goes and spends time with the Oberman family in the Washington suburbs. Goes to local steakhouse and so forth, and then goes to Detroit, where he's interviewed by Cream magazine. He goes to New York, where he goes and sees the Velvet Underground, and backstage he enthuses to a member of the group who he thinks is Lou Reed. It's not Lou Reed at all.
It's Doug Yule.
Lou Reed's left the group. It's Doug Yule. He goes to Houston, Texas, or Austin, Texas. I can't remember. One of the two. He comes back with the idea that he got a gun pulled on him for dressing in an androgynous fashion. Nobody knows this for a fact.
There's no proof, but it's
the source of all of this is David Bowie,
which is brilliant. And good luck to him. Why not?
Absolutely.
The interesting thing is also that actually David Bowie in Britain, slightly tainted by the fact that he'd had a hit, hadn't he, 2 years beforehand, Space Oddity, and had tried the records with Derham and stuff like that. And at that point, The Man Who Sold the World come out. His career was very uncertain, so he could go to America without the baggage of any of that past, without the hint of any kind of failure, and just reinvent himself to some extent. And it was really important. When he came back to Britain, he was so supercharged by the experience, and produced Hunky Dory and then Ziggy Stardust, also very much influenced by the sound of Iggy Pop and the Stooges.
Ziggy Stardust would never have happened without his trip to the United States.
Yeah.
That whole thing comes from that kind of strange, when you get to the United States, particularly for the first time, and if you go a load of cities, you're not asleep at any point there. It's like a waking dream, the whole thing, You can imagine how it would be massively inspirational. And so he got the opportunity to kind of start again, Hunky Dory comes out in December 1971, does nothing at all, by which time he's already made every track but one of Ziggy Stardust, which comes out in the spring of 1972, and then suddenly it blows wide open. So it's just an absolutely extraordinary, pivotal moment in his career, is that 2 weeks. And so John Mendelssohn's written about it, and as a reprint, the original thing he wrote in Rolling Stone, and his reflections on it then and now, and also reproductions of his extraordinary photos.
And the book, peculiar to Mr. Bowie, comes with a free bottle of perfume. So that's different.
This is a junction in the word podcast. It separates that bit from this next bit.
You probably noticed in the last couple of weeks that a couple of Chinese students have reinvented artificial intelligence using 2 cocoa tins and a bit of string. And have absolutely upset the worldwide economy as a consequence of doing. And with this thing called DeepSeek. And I've been playing with it, Mark, and it's quite extraordinary. I've asked it to do various things. I asked it to do the shipping forecast as rendered by Nick Cave. Okay, you ready?
Very good.
And it's this extraordinary, detailed thing. It takes all the various regions that the shipping forecast deals with, and so north at Sierra, the fog rolls in like a funeral procession, thick and unyielding. The lighthouse keeper whispers psalms to the void, but the ships are blind tonight. Beware the rocks, they hunger. There you go.
That is really fantastic, Dave.
and I've got the weather forecast done by Tom Waits. Are you ready?
Yeah.
Okay. This is sunrise. Dawn will come slinking in sideways, all nicotine stained and apologetic. That big orange ball's got a hangover, blurry eyed and dragging its heels over the horizon. Now,
I'm sorry, but that's really good.
It's unbelievable that it's got that depth.
That is just because we've done this before with the ChatGPT, haven't we? And that's just a bit clunky and a bit kind of tends to sample things and just paste them in. But that is it's real sensibility, isn't it?
But it's interesting the challenge of AI is when it kind of comes to opinion. I've been playing with it, DeepSeek, and I asked it to give me the causes of the Franco-Prussian War, and you couldn't argue with that. But then I put to it a question about pop music, which I thought might rather put it on the spot, Mark. Okay, and this is my question. I said, which is musically most significant, disco or punk? Okay, disco or punk. And so, frankly, it gave me a pretty waffly answer. Okay,
yeah,
loads of things about electronic instruments, disco, and so forth. LGBT, marginalized communities, blah 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 blah, and then punk rock, massive upheaval, all this kind of thing. Now, the fact is that all that background stuff is all well and good.
That's not opinion, that's fact, isn't it? This is disco and this is what punk is, but it's not which is more significant.
Yeah, whereas which is more significant is an interesting question about pop music because there is a correct answer. Yeah. And the correct answer is disco.
Disco.
It just simply is. I'm sorry. Don't be silly, AI. It is. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it just struck me, reflecting on that the kind of the future of AI will be in kind of recycling settled opinion. You know what I mean? The kind of obvious stuff, you know what I mean? And increasingly, that's the kind of stuff that, if in a world of Google News, that's what news is. You know what I mean? It's what do most people want to believe? Okay, we'll give them that. You know what I mean? We'll provide that for them. Whereas some things are matters of fact, And you've got to come down on one side of the fence or the other. And AI so far just using my experience, my example of disco and punk, is rather uncomfortable doing that, don't you think?
It is. Although we did try and talking about when we were talking about David Bowie, we just asked it to point up the importance of David Bowie's trip to America. And what struck me as amazing was it said there are 5 reasons why this was significant. And it had point 1, point 2, point 3, 4, 5. And it said, and in summary, then there was a paragraph, and everything it said was absolutely true, really well worded. It wasn't cliched. It wasn't little bits of kind of rock journalistic phrases that suddenly, appeared. It was just incredibly logical and I thought really impressive. And of course, done in 4 seconds?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it is stunning, really.
I asked it again, changing the subject slightly. I asked it the other day, who in football benefits from VAR? Okay, that's my question. And I got back, the fans and the officials and the players and da-da-da-da-da. And it gave me the usual list. Of course, it forgot the key community who really benefit from VAR. TV.
Yeah.
What it's there for. It's there.
It's to make great television.
It's there to turn sport into television. That's what it's for. It's as simple as that. Yeah. And so it's not comfortable saying stuff like that because stuff like that is vaguely controversial. But it's true, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
It's a true fact. Another true fact you've learned from the Word in Your Ear podcast.
The Word Podcast, 2 cocoa tins and a piece of string.
So a funny thing happened the other day. Me and the wife were in a small cafe in Chelsea, sheltering from the rain, waiting for a shop round the corner to open. And it's only a small little coffee shop and not part of a chain. And there would be 10 people in there maybe. And they're kind of smattering of people such as you'd expect in Chelsea on a rainy Tuesday afternoon or whatever it was. There's a couple of middle-aged Japanese ladies probably waiting to pick up their kids from school. There's a couple of women with laptops doing whatever they're doing. There's somebody waiting for their girlfriend, boyfriend, and so forth. And it's usual noises of a coffee shop, with steam escaping, things being stirred and things coming in and out of the microwave or whatever.
Ciabatta being buttered.
Ciabatta burning.
Oat biscuits being crunched.
and I'm aware of, there's some kind of music playing tinnily in the distance, through the shops. I wouldn't call it a PA system, and it's got some means of playing music. And this music is just loud enough to be kind of, it's audible, you know what I mean? And it's loud music played quietly, which is a kind of an odd thing, really, loud music played quietly. And as I crane my, self towards it, I realise that this music playing at 2:30 on a rainy Tuesday afternoon in a small coffee shop in Chelsea is When the Levee Breaks by Led Zeppelin.
Being presented as a ballad. Yeah.
I thought this is just extraordinary because nobody in the place is remotely aware of this apart from me. I don't even say to my wife, that's When the Levee Breaks by Led Zeppelin, And anyway, it's on some greatest hits Led Zeppelin compilation or whatever. And so it goes on to the next track. And I just can't concentrate on anything because I'm thinking about the fact that, that Robert Plant is kind of caterwauling, your custard pie, sweet and nice. When you cut it, Mama, save me a slice. And there's 2 Japanese ladies who are kind of looking at each other, showing pictures of their kids on their phones or whatever. And then we move on to, Squeeze me, baby, till the juice runs down my leg. Squeeze me, baby, till the and I'm thinking, there's somebody over there, texting.
Another latte, sir.
Yes. And I just think, surely people playing background music have a duty. I'm not suggesting censorship or anything like this, but it's ludicrous to listen to that kind of thing in that kind of context. It's just absolutely mad. And the madness of it was further underlined by the fact that when the Led Zeppelin CD finished, or whatever it was, the next tune you heard, Mark, was The Girl from Ipanema. And you thought, well, that's right.
That's all right. That works.
That's background.
There's some music that's not designed to be played quietly, isn't it? Led Zeppelin's one of them, I think. The Stooges, The Who. I think The Who just doesn't really work at low volume. White Stripes.
It has no place as background music.
No,
just simply no place as background music.
You've got
it's foreground music, or it's nothing at all. And if you can't put it in the foreground, don't play it.
Yeah.
I tell you what, don't play it. And so I just thought it was extraordinary that the girl behind the counter, nobody thought, this is not really right. I'll just click this over and play something different, But it's just people play background music so kind of reflexively. They don't think about it. They don't think about it at all.
No.
It's so often I hear background music in shops and so forth. What are you playing that for goodness sake? It's usually there's one member of staff who likes the idea of playing something really abrasive because they think it expresses
being
their
rebellious. I don't belong here. I shouldn't be working. I shouldn't be a barrister.
Yes.
So I'm going to put on "Oh Bondage Up Yours" by X-Ray Specs, yes. and even if only I can hear it, at least I'll get the joke.
Yeah,
that's it.
So I had a further kind of retail shopping experience. Later that same afternoon, I was killing time in London, swinging West End, and as you know, I used to work 50 years ago now, and the big old HMV shop down by Bond Street Station. I think it was 363 Oxford Street was the address. When it was the biggest record shop in the world. And if you just indulge me for a second, when you used to go in this place in 1974, 75, you'd never seen so many records in your life. Nobody had seen so many records in your life. There were no great megastores all over on every corner, that hadn't happened at that point. So you went in, you just couldn't believe how many records you could see. You go on the ground floor and there would be kind of jazz and soundtracks, and middle of the road and international and singles, records gleaming and glistening and glittering as far as the eye could see. And then you go upstairs, there would be rock records. You go to the top floor, there'd be cassettes. You go down the basement, there'd be classical and all that. Anyway, as we know, that shop closed some years ago. And then the HMV brand was kind of bought, wasn't it, by a Canadian entrepreneur. Yeah. And started a bunch of HMV shops. Well, they reopened a bunch of HMV shops around the country. And then finally they retook the old site, which I couldn't help. It warmed the cockles of my heart, the idea that the old place was still going and selling records. So I happened to be down there. I thought, I'll pop in is what I thought, Mark. So I popped in and I stood there on the ground floor, and what I saw shook me rigid, Mark. Shook me rigid. Because you know what I saw? Cool. Do you know what I saw as far as the eye could see, Mark? I saw 2 words: no records.
You saw merch. You saw T-shirts.
I saw merch piled to the bloody ceiling. And now I'm sure there are records on other floors. Frankly,
there are probably records upstairs. And also, I guess a lot of those people just don't buy music. They just stream it, don't they? But the principle that you go into the biggest record shop and there are no records on the ground floor is chilling, isn't it?
It is absolutely extraordinary because, I was talking to some people about this, the other day at the event at 21 Soho, which was, because I've been ranting, or you and I have been ranting a couple of weeks ago about the Financial Times had run that piece about the greatest record shops in the world, and they weren't really record shops; they were kind of boutiques, weren't they?
Were antique shops.
They were antique shops, And I was saying to somebody the other night, a record shop is a place where you go in and say, "Have you got ABBA's greatest hits?" And they go, "Yes, it's over there," or "No, we'll order it for you," or whatever. There's a kind of expectation that records are provided. If you've got a record shop where you don't put any records on the ground floor, you're not a record shop, are you, for crying out loud? You know what I mean? You are what appears on the ground floor.
A few records upstairs.
And so, isn't it extraordinary that we've come to this stage? And it's happened over a period of 20 years where, what people want most is not the music, but kind of relics of the music. It's kind of things, associated objects of veneration. Do you know it? Now, this may seem a stretch, Mark, but bear with me. This is like the Catholic Church before the Reformation, isn't it?
God,
yes, isn't it? This is, selling fragments of the true cross. That's basically what they're doing. And so I feel that, that I'm going to set myself up as the Martin Luther of this particular situation. And I'm going to post my, my objections on the door of HMV some dark night.
Nail them there. But I don't know. I think it's a bit like our conversation about A Complete Unknown, the Dylan biopic. That I think there's just a load of people, which I sort of understand. It's just a load of people in their 20s for whom the idea of Dylan and the look of Dylan and what he wore in his beatnik clothes and that particular time, trying to recapture it, is more important than the sound of Dylan. I'm sure they love the sound of Dylan. But, they just like the idea of him as an attitude. Beatnik is an attitude. Folk protest is an attitude. Hippie is an attitude. You can like the idea of hippies without having to rush out and buy a Jefferson Airplane album or whatever. Punk rock, I think, is the best example of this. My theory about punk rock, and I'm probably completely wrong, is that punk rock is adored as an attitude. But I think that punk rock only really works as kind of live music. And I don't believe that there's anybody, even people who grew up with punk rock being a big part of their lives when they were teenagers or whatever, I don't believe they go home after a long day's work, hurl themselves onto a couch, pour themselves a stiff drink and bang on, Where Have All the Boot Boys Gone by Slaughter and the Dogs. I just don't think they do it. I don't think they listen to Don't Dictate by Penetration. I think that music just works as something that's live. You associated it with performance, with actually being there. So I think punk rock's a really good example. Like punk rock, you very rarely hear those punk rock records on the radio. Not that I listen to the radio a huge amount, but as a concept, punk rock lives on, doesn't it?
So shall we go? Okay, and this is the conclusion of this section. The takeaway is, in the end, the slogans last longer than the music.
The Word Podcast. Fix yourself a drink, and it's like being in the pub.
Just a quick reminder, if you haven't already done so, you can sign on to be a Patreon supporter and get that warm glow that you will feel from knowing that you've done your bit to keep this enterprise on the road. And also, if you're a birthday boy like Kevin Rose, hello, Kevin.
Hello.
You could be joining us on the occasion of your birthday to throw a log on the Word in Your Ear fire. So, Kevin, have you had the birthday yet?
Yes, it was on Tuesday, and a very nice day I had too.
How was it celebrated, Kevin?
My wife took me to see Inside Number 9 in the West End.
Oh, I bet that was great.
Which was, they asked you not to say anything about it. The only thing I will say was it was fantastic.
Oh, good. Well, they ask you in terms of not giving away Because it's a kind of suspense, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, it's certainly not. It's not like just a lazy cash in. It's the opposite. It's a lot of thought.
I love those two
into
guys.
it. It's really, I think it's sold out. But I didn't know until the day. But it was fantastic. Yeah.
Fantastic! What a good thing.
Well, the people have known the ending of The Mousetrap ever since about 1961, haven't they? It doesn't make any difference.
Doesn't stop them going.
Doesn't stop them going. So it may be the same thing. So, Kevin, as I say, you've got a log to throw on the fire. What is it?
Oh, well, I was after Marianne Faithfull's passing, I started reading her first volume of her autobiography, and I was just thinking about obviously Mick Jagger's acting in inverted commas in performance and various things about who has successfully made a transition from musician, pop star, rock star, whatever, to actor, rather than just being, say, a novelty, which I would say Mick Jagger is, really.
And do you have the answer to this?
Well, no, I'm going to have a few thoughts, whether Frank Sinatra would really count as a sort of a pop star, I suppose, but I don't know. I can't think of, I suppose Justin Timberlake is a...
Yes, that's true, actually. But, he's all right. He's okay. But, you know, they're kind of stage school kids, aren't they, people like that?
Harry Styles. They are, aren't they?
Yeah.
They were trained from an early age, and but he's pretty good. And also, he doesn't always look like, oh my God, it's Justin Timberlake. You know what I mean? He kind of he can change a little bit. I always think it's very difficult to answer this question, but I always think it's inverse proportion to the level of kind of pretension involved. You know what I mean? There are certain people who think, I'm such a kind of Renaissance man, you know, I have to be able to act. And they can't. Renaissance women. It's like Madonna. Madonna can't act at all. The only act Madonna can do is Madonna. And you're kind of superimposing an act on an act. It's a little bit the same with Mick Jagger. Because Mick Jagger, you know, he didn't come out of the womb being like that. You know what I mean? He turned himself into this popinjay strutting about in front of a rock band. And once you put him in a movie, it kind of doesn't work at all. Whereas people like Frank Sinatra, I always think Frank Sinatra passes one of the great tests of being a movie actor. And don't forget, this is not acting, this is movie acting. Is that he can do ordinary things in a way that we like to watch. You know, he could smoke a cigarette or drive a car, whatever, in the way that we'd like to watch that. Doesn't look self-conscious about it. Whereas I always felt David Bowie looked terribly self-conscious when he was called upon to do ordinary things, you know. And oddly enough, Elvis Presley, you know, I know stupid, terrible films, but he was comfortable in front of a camera. You know, he didn't mind the idea of a camera minutely inspecting him and blowing him up to, you know, 80 feet high or whatever it is. That's one of the ways I like it.
The people you remember tend to be the ones who played themselves, as you were saying, that Madonna in Desperately Seeking Susan and Dylan and Pat Garrett and Tom Waits in The Ballad of Buster Scruggs. They're just required to say virtually nothing, because the more they say, the more they're less convincing. And I think Chris Christopherson and Cher were good, but I've always thought of them really as almost as actors as well as musicians, so I'm not sure if that counts. I think there's one example of somebody who's really, really good, I thought, was Lady Gaga. Have you ever seen Star is Born with Bradley Cooper? Because she's fantastic in that. She's really funny and she's really characterful, big, wide range of emotions. You're not convinced that it's her. The only thing against it is that she's playing the part of a singer. And would she be as convincing if she was an airline pilot or a politician or somebody, you know, working on an oil rig or whatever? So she has got that advantage. But she's very good, I think.
I think Beyonce in the Austin Powers movie was good, but I haven't seen her in anything else to know whether she's got range, as it were.
But you see, I often think we misunderstand acting, you know, particularly movie acting. You know, you think it's the ability to turn yourself into... You know, it can be a chameleon-like figure and turn up as something wildly different. If you look at the big successful movie actors, they don't do that at all. You know, Jack Nicholson plays minute variations on the character of Jack Nicholson. That's what he's done forever. And we can't get enough of Jack Nicholson. Yeah, Robert De Niro also. I mean,
it's true
even when he played in, Meet the Parents or whatever, the kind of joke was, oh, look, there's Robert De Niro not playing a character like that.
Not trying to be funny and trying to be different.
Yeah. It's, we misunderstand it. And that's why I made the point about stage acting and film acting are very, very different things, I think stage acting, you need a different kind of confidence. And I don't think you can do stage acting without training and, being a certain kind of personality.
Because Bowie's Elephant Man was really praised, wasn't it? And I saw the Bradley Cooper Elephant Man, so I knew what the sort of the stage version's like. It's quite stripped down, isn't it? And but I wonder whether it was, I like The Man Who Fell to Earth, but it's sort of Bowie, isn't it? It's in the same way that performance is not a big stretch.
He is really an Elephant Man. I mean, I thought Elephant Man was good too, and it was convincing. But what he's required to do is in such a narrow frame, isn't it? That if you can nail that, he really doesn't have to do anything outside of those very, very narrow parameters. And he was good, but it didn't test him.
No. I mean, I've not known. I mean, if musicians could make a huge success of being movie actors, they would stop being musicians. Because the great thing about movie actors is loads of the heavy lifting is done by other people. Somebody else has got to write the story. Somebody else has got to direct it. Somebody else has got to make it a big hit. Whereas if you're going and doing your 25th album, it's kind of up to you, really. You can write
That's true. If it's a bad film, you can say it's somebody else's fault.
Well, yeah.
It's not entirely about you, is it?
And then, and it used to be the case that, people like, Bing Crosby, Elvis Presley, Frank Sinatra, they kind of effectively stopped doing music, really, for years, didn't they? And just did films. Because films were a way of, they could make more money, they could have more success. Very few people get that option, I think, in the movie business. They give them a go because it's easier to put out a film with with a Chapel Roan in the lead part than it is to have just an actress, because half your marketing budget is spent already. But whether you invite her back or not rather depends on whether the public really take to the idea of her as a movie star, and she hasn't done it. No doubt she will at some point. So,
you'd like to have seen have a go from the past.
Sorry,
I wonder if there's anybody you would have liked to have seen have a go from the past.
Well, that's interesting. I don't know. I mean, there's the oddest thing that doesn't Randy Newman appear as the burning bush in The Three Amigos? Doesn't he? I think he should.
Again, that can't be a taxing role.
But he wrote that film. He co-wrote that film, I think he did. Bruce Springsteen turns up in High Fidelity, doesn't he?
Yeah, but he's High Fidelity. Bruce Springsteen,
he plays Bruce Springsteen.
It's very good. Holds your attention.
Yeah. Elvis Costello pops up in loads of things. I'd say the weirdest thing I saw the other day, and I've completely gone out of my head, is that the Larry Sanders Show, the Gary Shandling.
Yeah, love him.
Brilliant thing. And I keep watching it, and God knows how old it is, 20, 30 years or something. And it was only when I was watching it the other day that I was reminded of the fact that Gary Kemp appeared in that.
Gary Kemp's quite good.
Gary Kemp is perfectly good.
I think he's really quite good. He was in various spoof documentaries about him and
as well.
And his brother, the Spandau Ballet things. And actually, he's very, very funny in them, and I'm really watchable. As you can tell from those little clips he's done promoting his new album, he's just really good on camera and really, really contained. He's fantastic, actually.
Doesn't Costello sell Hank a car or something? Isn't it something like that? Doesn't he sell Hank Kingsley a car?
Oh yeah, he's trying to get the job as the musical director, isn't he, or something? Yeah, and he crosses Hank, and of course nobody crosses Hank and survives. No. But no, I'd completely forgotten that he'd done that, and I must ask him about that next time I see him, because I'm a huge fan of the Larry Sanders Show. So, well, look, I don't know if we come up with an answer or not, but at least we've aired the subject, which is half the battle.
Poured a little petrol on the embers.
Yeah.
Anybody listening who has any ideas, send them in.
Yeah,
it's a good debate.
And well, look, happy birthday belatedly over the last few days, Kevin. And I hope you get to see Spurs this afternoon, and I hope that they win. But whatever.
This podcast was brought to you by The Word.